bumped off when this recording starts. Jump back in. Hi, folks. We're here today. This little workshop is going to be on percussion maintenance. There are a ton of things we can cover, but I'm just going to cover a couple basics. If you have any questions, jump in on the chat, and we'll do that. Let's keep the chat to relevant things for this particular clinic. I'll give you time at the end if you want to chat with each other or ask any questions. So, with percussion, the thing that makes it the most interesting and challenging is that there are so many things that are considered percussion. So things that are typical looking drums and drum sets and things we hit with sticks, and then also other items like mallets, bells, xylophones, that sort of thing. And then there's a lot of stuff in between. So when we're talking about percussion, we're talking about anything that makes it sound by hitting. So that could be with a stick or a hand or a mallet or a scraping kind of thing. If in the background you hear any weird noises, I'm at the high school. This is a construction zone, so you may see people walking back and forth by my window over there, or hear some weird noises, and that's why that's going on. But we're going to start with the most sort of basic drum that you're probably familiar with, and that's a snare drum. So I've got one right here. And a standard snare drum has some main parts. We call the top of it a drum head, and that's what we're going to hit. We actually call this the batter head because we're hitting it with different things, and that's why that one works that way. If we look at the side, this is called the shell, and this one is a solid wooden shell, and sometimes they come in different types of metals and lots of different materials there. And then the rim is this metal part that we have attached the drum head with, and the lugs are what we screw them into. So what we want to do is make sure we're hitting this properly. And the bottom here is, we don't ever want to hit this thing. This bottom head, this is where the snares are. Or if it's a drum set, it might not have these snares on the bottom. It might just have the head here, but we don't ever want to hit this with anything. These are not made to be hit. They're much lighter weight than that. But on a typical drum, all these lugs are adjustable. So if you unscrew all of them, this head comes off, which is not the best idea because it's hard to adjust it to get it right back to where you want it. If any of you have seen in your drum kits a drum key, if this has ever come with your drum, this is actually the type of screwdriver, if you will, or wrench that we put on these lugs, and then we use it to tighten it or loosen it. And as I tighten and loosen, I can adjust the sound of this drum. So if I tap and I make this too tight, I don't know if you can hear through the microphone that I just made that sound higher. I don't know if you can hear that difference, but I definitely, as I tighten it, the sound of the drum gets higher. If I loosen it, the sound of the drum gets lower. And the trick with the drum is we want this consistent the whole way around, and that's why it's tricky when we're maintaining our drum to keep that balance. So it's really important that if you're using this, you do it properly, and we're just gonna use a tiny bit around the sides. But honestly, I wouldn't touch that too much, because if you tighten it too much, this head might be too tight. When you hit it with the drum, you may snap the head, and then you've got bigger problems because you got to buy a new drum head and all that. Since this is a snare drum, it's worth noting that it has what they call, let's turn it this way, snares on the bottom. And snares are set up in a way, they just rest on this bottom head. So when I hit the drum, that's what makes that rattle sound. That's pretty typical for a snare drum, okay? Now with that, these are adjustable too. If I turn it this way, you can see there's this whole bracket here. And if you're playing your snare drum and it doesn't sound quite right, this may need to be adjusted. So I can loosen this. And I don't know if you can see right here, it actually dropped all these snares. You see how it's moving up, down? So when they're off, it has a whole different sound than when they're on. It sounds more like a tom or a drum set when it's off. But this little fine tuner here is if I pull this up and this isn't quite tight enough, I can twist this a little bit and make this even a little more tight. And I can change the sound of my drum that way. A good snare, like this one, has little feet too. This little foot here, I don't know if I turn it this way, can you see how that's a raised foot? And then also right there. That's in case I need to place it down somewhere, like on this table. That way the drum isn't resting against this bottom head and the snares. We want to lift it up a little, because if we're touching that bottom head, we're going to change the sound of the drum, and we don't want that. Now, if you're feeling really special, they make lots of different drum keys. But what I showed you was the standard one that'll come with your drum set or your snare drum. But they make these cool ones. This one just has a bigger handle, so it's easier for old guys like me to grip them, because I have bigger hands, and I can twist that. And then they also make these types that are ratchet types. And this works just like a ratchet you may have at home in a toolbox, where I can tighten it, and then I can keep tightening and loosening, like that. And then I can turn the switch and it goes the other direction. This one does the same type of move, but it spins this way and that way, depending on which way you've got it set. So that's kind of cool. We can tighten and loosen, that kind of stuff. When we're talking about drums, though, part of the thing you want to know is how to be organized. You need to be organized to be a good drummer. That's why I recommend, and I put this in the syllabus before, that you all have some kind of stick bag. Now, this is a pretty big one. I grabbed this one from the high school. We have a lot more things at the high school we're dealing with. But this particular stick bag, you can see, very wide. They make really skinny ones that can fit 2 or 3 sets of sticks. But you want this. This is basically your instrument case, because you're not carrying drums all over the place, and you're not carrying a drum set and a xylophone everywhere typically. You've got probably 1 or 2 at home and then several at school. So you want to carry this back and forth. This is the equivalent of your case. If you go to the music store, you can get different sizes. They're not expensive. You can get these on Amazon too. But what's great about them is, like with any bag, there's different pockets. This one's got a couple across the front here. This one's got a shoulder strap, so it's easy to carry. It's also got some handles, so you can just carry it that way. And it's also got, in this one, it's got little hooks. I don't know if you can see that. Yeah, on both sides, which means this can be hooked to the side of the xylophone or the drum, as long as it doesn't hinder the performance, and you can have all your sticks right there. Drum set players use these a lot, where they wrap them around probably the bigger drum that's on the floor, and then they can have all their sticks handy. And then this one's, like I said, really big. It's got lots of space. Every good drummer is going to have a couple pairs of sticks of different sizes. This would be a standard SD1. This is for like concert band stuff. You want to use a slightly skinnier set for drum sets, but they do make all types. And then maybe 2 types of mallets. One with yarn, like these, or with felt, like this type, and then one that's like a harder mallet. This particular one is made of wood. They make them out of plastic. They make them out of rubber. There's a rubber tipped one. So you want 2 or 3 sizes of mallets with the different types of materials, and maybe 2 or 3 pairs of drumsticks. Now, I'm not saying go out today and buy all that, but you know, if each year, each semester, you pick up 1 pair, or ask mom or dad, hey, can I get a pair of yarn mallets for Christmas? You can put them in your bag, and then, you know, even though you may be playing a different instrument at school than you play at home, it's going to feel very similar because you're using your own stuff. Plus, it's a great way to keep track of your stuff. A lot of kids will put a name tag on here, so they have it ID'd as theirs. But I would recommend a stick bag for sure. We've had a couple questions, so I want to answer those before I talk about cymbals. So let's look through some of these questions. We got a question about electronic drum sets. So electronic drum sets are very cool, especially if you want to practice at home, because then your parents don't have to hear you banging all day. They're going to hear the sound of the stick hitting the drum, but they're not going to hear all the big bang, which is kind of cool. Let's keep it on mute and just type in your questions if you need to. If you don't have a stick bag, definitely get one. You're gonna find they're not that expensive. Maybe 15, 20 bucks for a simple one. You don't have to get a giant one like this. This just happens to be the example I grabbed. Do you tune your snare the same as the toms? Yeah. So when you're tuning, you want to look for a spot that sounds perfect. So if I really like the way my stick hits right about here, and that sounds great, but over here it doesn't sound good, I want to compare those two sounds. That one, maybe it sounds higher. That means I want to tighten this lug up a teeny bit. It may sound lower, so I want to loosen this one up. But you're going to have to do that in each spot. So as you're playing, you're tight and loosen a little. But still, that sort of thing, you just want to reserve for if something doesn't sound right. And I would suggest you bring it into me, and I'll help you with that, or if you know somebody who's a drummer. When you're talking about the toms, if on a drum set, you're going to tune it the same way. There's just no snare involved. So it's going to sound more like if I turn the snares off. It's going to sound more like that. There are plenty of tutorials online about the right pitches and sounds that those drums should equal. Because as you're playing your toms, your high to low toms, you want those to have a good difference in pitch. So, and a lot of that has to do with personal preference on that. I wanted to add about cymbals too. So I grabbed this hi-hat. It wouldn't be too big. Cymbals are just as important. Let's see if I can get this high enough so you can see it. Yeah. So cymbals are great. Lots of different cymbals. A lot of you probably don't have a cymbal at home. But if you do, maybe you have a drum set and you've got some cymbals on there. These are instruments, but sometimes we feel like they're just toys because all we're doing is banging on them. But there are so many things you can do. Let me grab a couple sticks and mallets. There we go. It depends on where you hit them. Near the crown, we get some great sounds as we work our way out to the outer rim here. We can get different sounds out of our cymbals, whether it be a hi-hat, a crash, a ride. And we do want to take care of those. So this one's been a little oxidized over time. I'm not suggesting you go out and clean these. Just try to keep them dry. Don't let them get wet in the rain if you're going outside or something. Keep those in good shape. But a couple things you want to do if you're going to be a good drummer and you're trying to maintain your abilities, you want to practice your rolls on your drums over there, but also on your cymbals, because that's really important. If I'm doing a roll with something that's yarn or felt, it's going to have a different feel and a different sound than if I'm rolling with a stick. And it also matters where you're playing. So typically if you're doing a roll, and imagine I had two of the same things here, you want them equal distant on the instrument. So you're getting the same sound. If you put one way up here and one down here, you're not going to get the same sound, and your roll is going to be off, plus you're pushing the cymbal in different spots, and it's going to be hard to maintain that. So experiment on your cymbals, especially if you haven't, to figure out where they sound the best. And where you think they sound the best may sound different than what somebody else thinks, because a lot of that is going to be your opinion in there. But as you roll, you're going to find what sounds good. And then you may play in a band or be back in concert band, and it could be me or whoever's running the group might say, oh, that was great, but I want you to do it more out here because I want that sound for the group. And that doesn't mean anybody's right or wrong. We just all have preferences. Nathan asked, what polish would you use for cymbals? So I would, one of the best places to look in this day and age is the internet, of course. And on the internet, there are lots of places. But if you check out some regular drum sites like Zildjian, that starts with a Z, or Sabian, those are companies that specialize in cymbals, and you can find out typical maintenance and wear and care on cymbals and what's recommended for use and what's not. Some people will tell you, don't you ever touch these, because as they get older, they get what they call a patina, and they like the look of the older finish, and they think it'll help the sound over time. And other people that like the shiny new look and would rather have it all cleaned and polished. regardless of whether that changes the sound or not. But you're really just going to have to decide for yourself what you like. And again, with any of these tips on tuning or maintaining your instruments, be sure to be smart about it. Check with your parents. I don't want you breaking or damaging anything. Check with me or somebody you trust that maybe you get lessons from or plays a lot, has a lot of experience on what you can use for that. Okay? Do we have any more questions? Because we're almost out of time. I just want to open it up for you guys to have a bit of a chat. If we don't have any more questions, there's just so many things that percussionists can use and do that it's hard to boil all that down into one thing. I would use the same sort of techniques if you use the xylophone or a set of bells. Just use the right kind of sticks. Have several choices in your bag. There's not really much you can do with tuning and maintaining those. Just be sure you're using them properly and not hitting things too hard, because you don't want to damage anything or bend or break anything. That's really important. All right, so I'm going to stop the recording. And thanks for tuning in. If any of you want to continue the chat for a bit, that's fine. At 12:20, our chat will involve ways to help you use your key signatures and music reading and writing and that kind of thing. Thanks, everyone.